Hey, hello, hi. My name is Dasha and today I am bringing you my August wrap-up. I had a freaking fantastic reading month. I had all 4 stars and 1 5-star, which is incredible, and I'm really excited. I read 6 books, a mix of a little bit of fantasy and some nonfiction and some horror. So let's get right into it. I'm gonna go from my least favorite to my most favorite. I'm gonna start off with Monstrous Volume 1. I think it's called The Awakening. This is a fantasy graphic novel about this world. So there was this war between humans and the Arcanics, which were kind of human/animal hybrids. They're their own species, and neither of them kind of think that the other deserve rights, basically. And we're following this girl. Her name is Micah, and she's basically trying to get revenge for her family, and she's discovering that there's maybe more to the war that she thought there was initially, and that every aspect of both species is corrupt. I gave this a 4-star, but now that I think about it, I don't know. So I have not read a lot of graphic novels or mangas. I'm not really familiar with the genre, and so it's hard for me to rate it because I can't treat it like a book, because obviously the only thing that we're getting in terms of writing is dialogue, and it's hard to rate on that alone, and it's hard to get like full character development because you don't get all of their thoughts and that kind of stuff. So I felt very ambivalent towards it in terms of like being attached to Micah and all of the characters around her. I really did love the art style. It's kind of Art Deco meets steampunk. It's absolutely beautiful. It's absolutely stunning, and I will read more if not only for that artwork. But overall, I found that, like I said, the character, I couldn't quite connect to our main character, but again, that might be the fault more of the format. I have like a very like no thoughts, head empty feeling when I look at this and try to think of what I enjoyed about it other than the setup to the fantasy world. It feels like there was I don't know how to describe this, which is making me feel like I should lower my rating maybe. Right after I said I had a great reading month. I don't know, because it was set up to, because we're introduced to everyone and because you don't know what's going on because you're just being introduced to the world, it's a lot. And I feel like I didn't quite connect with it as much as I'd wanted to, but like again, the art style is beautiful. It's a really brutal and dark world, but it's also very beautiful, and I do want to continue with it. I have very lukewarm feelings toward this book, and it's very hard for me to even sit here and put it into words, because when I think about it, I just get this like meh feeling about what I felt about it. And again, that's probably because of the format. I can't accurately put my finger on what it is about this book that I don't love and connect with, but there's just like I said, there's just something about it I didn't quite connect to, which is disappointing. But I will be continuing, and I'm hoping that it does get more enthralling as it goes along, because I did have high hopes. Next, I want to talk about Vicious by V.E. Schwab. Even though it's not a tome per se, I was buddy reading it during Tome Topple, so I couldn't just abandon it. If you'd like, I have kind of live reactions to the ending up in my vlog, which I will link here for Tome Topple. But overall, I gave this 4 to 5 stars, and I loved it a lot. I thought it was better than the Darker Shade of Magic series, which I read last year, and like, it was fine, but this was far superior. So this follows Victor and Eli, who are college roommates, and Eli decides for his thesis project to investigate extraordinaries, which are people with supernatural abilities and kind of superpowers. And Victor decides that he can't just stand by and let Eli do this himself. He wants to join in on the fun. And one of the only ways that they can figure out that extraordinaries come to be is by having near-death experiences. And it just kind of spirals down there. I was glad when I found out while reading this book that it was as dark as everyone had said, because oftentimes on BookTube, especially kind of the more YA side of YouTube, not to slight them, but they often say like, oh, this was super dark and super gritty, and like it kind of wasn't. I didn't feel that. Perfect example, Six of Crows, I found wasn't, for some reason I didn't find it as dark as everyone said it was, but this truly was dark. This truly was like screwed up, It had all these like dark twists that came out of nowhere. Victor, Sydney, and Mitch made a good little team, and I really enjoyed them. And I thought that like the way this was written was excellent. The pacing just made you want to fly through it, and I really, really enjoyed this. I thought the ending was perfect. You know, you kind of get scared when there's those big showdowns towards the end, but this wrapped up so well. Like I said, I gush about it in my Tome Topple vlog. So if you want a bit more thoughts, although it's probably about the same as this, a lot of rambling, you can go check it out there. I did really enjoy this book. I probably will pick up the sequel at some point. It's not a priority. I kind of like how this wraps up, but I probably will pick it up. And I think that if you enjoy like truly morally gray characters, truly kind of fucked up characters, this would be fun. My only gripe with it was that I felt like Victor was written a little bit too much, leaning into that like morally gray side. It felt a little exaggerated, and it could have been a bit more subtle. And I also felt as though, kind of the same thing I felt with Darker Shade of Magic, I still felt like I kind of was at arm's length from most of the characters. And it's a little disappointing because everyone just loves all these characters, and I want to as well, but I always feel a little bit distanced from Schwab's characters. But overall, like, this was a lot of fun. It was a good time. I'd recommend it. The next book I'm going to talk about is A Brief History of Vice by Robert Evans. This is a nonfiction about just basically how, like the blurb says, how bad behavior built civilization. Basically talking about things like drugs, sex, alcohol, cigarettes, how all of these things kind of developed over time and how they've shaped our civilization. I really enjoyed how authentic it felt. So the author is not just some scientist, researcher that's like removed from the subject. He tested a lot of the stuff that he talks about, which was kind of fun. He has this way of writing about it that feels very real. He's not just like telling you about this from a detached perspective. You can tell he really enjoys what he's writing about. You can tell that he loves testing it out and being, you know, a garbage person and testing all of the stuff in here, because he's testing out these like old recipes for booze, old recipes for shroom tea, like all this stuff that, you know, polite society does not normally accept, and he writes about it like he actually enjoys it and has a really good time. It's written in a really engaging way, and it's also really funny, but at the same time you do get some level of like educational content out of it. I do wish that there was some kind of like citations and sources in this, because I would have liked to do further research on some of the topics that he talked about. But I mean, at the end of the day, you can Google most of the stuff. I'm sure it was fact-checked to a certain point, but it's just something that I wish I had. I like when my nonfiction has like citations and sources so I can go and verify them if I do want to know more about them. I also think, like I said, how bad behavior builds civilization is a bit of a stretch. I would call it like how narcotics and bad behaviors and the attitudes towards them have changed over time and why humans enjoy them, but I don't know if you'd go as far as saying that they built civilization. Nevertheless, it was a really fun exploration of illicit drugs, booze, cigarettes, prostitution, and some of the behaviors behind them, and it even had to do with like gods and religion, which I always enjoy, and it also tied back to the Germans being on meth during World War II. And if you saw my June wrap-up, I actually talked about a whole book on that, Blitzed, and if that's a topic that interests you, this one also talks about it briefly. So there's that little tidbit. I was like, oh, I know about that. You know, it's always fun when you can actually like relate something else you've read to your book. So anyways, that was fun. The author's self-experimentation was so funny to read about, because no sane person would ever attempt most of this stuff, but he did and wrote about it, and it was just a delight to read. Like, it was fucking hilarious. It's also divided into like subsections, and they all kind of read like articles. So it's one of those books you don't have to sit and kind of remember what you read previously. It's one of those that you can kind of come back to. I had to put this down for Tome Topple, so there was a good 3-4 weeks where I wasn't reading this, but I was able to pick it back up and get back into it because there was different subsections that I was able to, you know, compartmentalize. I always have a hard time with that word. And you don't have to read like all of it to get like the whole idea. You can kind of dip in and out of it, like little articles, and it was perfect for that. It's a really fun read. If you're interested at all in like the history of like drugs and booze, this is a really interesting one to pick up. So I would absolutely recommend this. The next book that I want to talk about is Pet Sematary by Stephen King. This is a horror novel about a family that moves into this idyllic little farmhouse in Maine, and their neighbor from across the street shows them the pet cemetery where local kids go to bury their dead animals, and it spirals downhill from there. Wow, this was such a fun read. I absolutely love this. This got a 4 out of 5, 4.5 out of 5 stars for me. It was oaky, kooky, spooky.
It's the spooky, ooky, kooky, and creepy.
This was just a lot of fun. I had read Stephen King before. I've read a couple of his books, and this is one of those that I think is going to have more of a lasting impression on me. It was just so masterfully crafted. The suspense and even the like the calm, peaceful moments, it was there the whole time. And even though there was only action towards like the last 15-20% of the book, the whole book had a very purposeful feel to it. The characters were all so well done. Stephen King knows how to write people, man. There's one thing I can never knock him for, and it's his character work. Even in books of his that I didn't like as much, like The Outsider, his character work is so meticulous. He always has a way of making people seem very real and react in very real ways. You know, nothing ever seems, even though they're put through these horrible situations, and they're put through these situations that you could never imagine yourself in, when his characters react to them, it feels logical. It feels real. I think I'm gonna do a full like video review for this book because I have a lot of things to say and they're all good. Like I really liked it. I thought that everything was just like the suspense was so well crafted, and there was a lot of real hard topics discussed in this book. And that's one thing I like about horror, is that you can have these really meaningful discussions about things like grief in this book, for example, and trauma, but they're also set with a morbid backdrop, and it's just a lot of fun. And oh man, this was just a good time. I just didn't get that like 5-star feeling from it, which is why I didn't give it a full 5 stars. I also have a few issues with King's writing when he over-sexualizes certain things for absolutely no reason. I don't know why he keeps doing that, but other than that, like I think everything else about this book was perfect. Probably one of my favorite horror novels of all time, and definitely one of my favorite 2 Stephen King books. Absolutely. And the last 2 books I want to talk about are A Game of Thrones and A Clash of Kings by George R. R. Martin. I read both of these big boys, and I am proud. So A Game of Thrones, if you don't know, follows these families in Westeros, a fictional land where there is one king that rules the Iron Throne. After the Hand of the King dies, Lord Ned Stark of Winterfell is asked to go and be the new Hand of the King because he is friends with the current king. They grew up together, and he accepts, and he starts unraveling all these plots. There's so much political intrigue. There's so many little machinations behind the scenes that make this series one of the best series, I think. Everyone can agree is one of the best fantasy series of all times. So I'd watch the show before reading the books, and I thought this year that I'd maybe do a rewatch of the show, and I decided that I would pick up the books finally. This is one that I read during Tome Topple, which again you can see in the vlog if you want like actual reactions, but I'll summarize my thoughts. Game of Thrones, 5 out of 5 stars, an incredible setup, incredible character work. The little political things and all of these little workings and these tiny things that you think are not significant that show up later are so cool. The characters are all so complex, and it just keeps getting better in Clash of Kings. Honestly, the character work in this series is fucking unbelievable. I also feel as though there was, you know, for first book, it wasn't just setup. There was a lot of plot, a lot of action. George R. R. Martin is not afraid to kill people, and I love him and I hate him for it. He is just truly something special, and if you enjoy super dark fantasy, because there's obviously a lot of violence, sex, gore, like dark shit, you will absolutely enjoy this if you have not picked it up yet. I implore you. So Clash of Kings, I read in the second half of the month after I finished Tome Topple, because I was just still in the mood, you know? And I'll probably keep going with the series throughout the rest of the year. with my September TBR, if you've not seen it, I'll link it. It's a fucking disaster. There's so many big books on there. I really hate myself. But I'm hoping to continue the rest of the series. I picked them all up at Value Village the other day, so I have the next 3 books to read whenever I feel like it, and I'm hoping I can get to them. Because this was a bit of a middle book syndrome-y book. There is still a lot of plot. There is still a lot of incredible character work. I did give this 4 out of 5 stars, probably closer to 4.5. It just didn't have the same, like, holding on to the edge of my seat feeling that Game of Thrones gave me. Even though I know everything that happens, it was just written so well that you still felt enthralled and you were still gripped. I felt like with Clash of Kings, there was just a bit more of that, like, anticipation that was building. There was a bit more discussions. There was a bit more, like, political behind-the-scenes stuff going on. And that was a lot of fun, don't get me wrong. Like I said, it just didn't have the same feeling that Game of Thrones did. But this was still absolutely phenomenal. There's just so much wisdom dripping off every page. There's so much beautiful character work. George R.R. Martin, he has the way of writing that feels, like, nostalgic, even though I don't want to be in Westeros. It's a brutal and bloody land. I don't want to be there, but I feel nostalgic for it. I feel nostalgic for these characters. I feel nostalgic for this, for like the simple Winterfell castle life. I don't know, there's just something absolutely beautiful about his writing. And it's also like romantic. I don't know how he does it. I don't know how he does it, but I have so much love for this series. I can't wait to continue it. I also want to give a quick mention to a part of an arc that I read. So, I'd applied for an arc of Lore by Alexandra Bracken. This is I think it's young adult, and it's basically a urban fantasy involving Greek gods. So I applied for an arc of this because as soon as I heard Greek gods, urban fantasy, I was fucking sold, and the cover is really nice too. And I got approved right away, but it was only a chapter sampler. But I thought I'd still throw it in here because if anyone is interested in this, I absolutely recommend this. From what I read of it, I actually really, really liked it. Also, Goodreads counted it for some reason. When I pressed submit for my review of the chapter sampler, it uploaded to Goodreads and it counted it as read, even though I've only read like, I don't know, probably 15% of the book. I have no idea. So in this world, the Greek gods are being punished, and once every 7 years during the Aegon, they descend to the earth in mortal form for 7 days, and they are hunted by the big, like, families, these ancient households, and these households try to kill one of the Greek gods, the original, I think there is 9 of the, like, original Olympians, and once you kill one, the hunter basically gets their power, so they become the new Aphrodite, the new Ares. And we're following Lore, who is the last surviving member of her ancient household. The rest of her family was killed by one of the new gods. And she is basically in hiding. She wants nothing to do with the Aegon. She wants nothing to do with this world. But one day, a wounded Athena turns up at her doorstep and gives her an offer that she feels she might not be able to refuse. And this was a really interesting beginning. I really would love to see how this goes because I thought that the setting of New York City was really cool, and this kind of game, this very dangerous game to hunt down the old Greek gods, sounded really intriguing. I'm a sucker for anything Greek, we know this by now, but I felt like this fresh spin on it, where the gods are the hunted and they are being punished for what they've done, kind of puts them into like a different situation. I also felt like the main character Lore was actually a quite interesting heroine that I'm excited to follow. She felt very strong, even though she had a ton of trauma to deal with. I thought that was probably very good setup for some really interesting, character development further down the road. So I'm really excited for this. So this comes out on January 5th next year, and I'm definitely going to try to pick up the finished copy of this because I think this was a really cool start. So I thought I'd throw it in here in case anyone is interested. I do want to talk about the arcs that I get approved for in NetGalley because I think the whole point of getting approved for those is to be able to, spread the word of mouth. So yeah. And I think that is it. Thank you guys so much for watching. Feel free to leave me a comment if you've read any of these before. I know some people were thinking of reading Game of Thrones on my gushing recommendation of it, so if you have read it or if you're thinking of reading it, let me know. Otherwise, my socials are linked down below. Feel free to give me a follow and a subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!